Today we are making the Louisiana star quilt block. So I love this little quilt block because there's a lot of visual interest. We've got a pinwheel effect, we've got the windmill look going on, and it's easy to make. So let's get started. To make a 6-inch block, we will need one square that is 4 1/2 inches. Then we'll need 4 squares that are 2 5/8 inches. And then we will need 4 rectangles, and these are 2 by 3 1/2. Okay, so these squares is what we're going to be using to make our flying geese here. So these pieces right here are called flying geese. And we're just going to take our small squares and we're going to flip them on the back side, and we're just going to draw some lines, and these are going to be lines that we can sew on. And I'm just going to use my little flying geese ruler here, but you can use any quilting ruler that has a 1/4 inch marking along it. You're going to line up that marking, the 1/4 inch line, from corner to corner on the square, and then you'll just draw a line next to it. This is hard to see because this fabric's kind of dark, but it'll be good enough to see. So I don't know if you can tell here, I've got my 2 lines on here, and we'll just do that with all of our squares of fabric, and these are going to be the lines that we sew on here in a minute. Okay, so next we'll take 2 of our squares and our large square. We're going to place the small squares on opposite sides of the square, just like this. We're going to make sure that the lines are running so that they connect with each other. You will have a little bit of an overlap here, and that's totally fine. That is what we want. Next we'll go to the sewing machine and we will just stitch along both of these lines. Okay, so I have the stitching sewn on here. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to take our ruler, line it up from point to point, and we will just trim or cut the block right in half, just like this. So then the next thing we'll do is we'll grab our ironing mat and we will press open these blocks. So I'm just going to lift these little triangles up and press the block open, just like this. So you'll have this little heart shape. Okay, so we'll take our last 2 squares and we will place them in these corners here. And you want the lines to be vertical like this. So make sure they're oriented that way. And then we'll just take these to the sewing machine, and again we will stitch along those lines that we drew. Okay, so we have our block sewn together. We will just take our ruler, we will just line it up between those 2 seams, and we will just trim and cut it in half just like that. Okay, and then we will press these open again. So what I like about this method is you can make 4 flying geese at once, and they're pretty easy to make this way. And for this block we need 4, so it works out perfectly. Now, if you would like to make this block in a different size, as always, I've created a printable pattern. So go ahead, I'll have the link to my shop listed so that you can find that. Okay, so we have our flying geese made, and you can tell they're a little wonky. We've got tails on them, they're not perfectly straight. So we're going to take a ruler. This is called the Quilt in a Day flying geese ruler. If you have other flying geese rulers, I'm sure they would work as well. I really like this one. I find it easy to use, but you can use whatever one that you would like. But I do find it helpful to use a flying geese ruler to straighten up the edges and get it perfectly the rectangle size that you want, so that your pieces fit nicely together. So let me go over exactly how I'm using this. So I'll take a flying geese, and on this ruler there is a triangle, Now this is the size we're using. There's also a triangle this way if you were doing a 3x6, but this one is the size that we need. It's 1.5 by 3 inches, and this is for a 6-inch block. If you wanted to make the 12-inch, then you would use the 3x6. But on this, there's the triangle, like I said, and you're going to line up that triangle with the triangle on your fabric. And then you're just going to trim around it, just like that. And then I have this handy twistable cutting mat, just because I don't want to pick it up and move it more than I have to. I will have to flip it around to do the bottom side. So how I do this is I line up the bottom of the triangle, that straight line, I line it up with the square, and then I trim off. This one doesn't have much to trim, but then it will just make a perfect rectangle, and then your block will fit nicely together. So just one more time, we're going to line up that triangle on the ruler with the triangle in our flying geese, and then we will just trim around all 3 sides, the top 3 sides, and I did not cut that. I seem to have trouble catching the ends sometimes. Okay, and then once we've done that, we will flip it upside down. We will use the bottom line in our ruler to line up the bottom of the flying geese, or the bottom of a rectangle, and then trim off that piece. Okay, so we have our 4 flying geese made. So we're just going to arrange it, our pieces. We're just going to lay out the blocks. So first I just like to start with the pinwheel. So I'm just looking at these center pieces here, and I'm just orienting them to create the pinwheel effect. And I'm actually not super liking these colors because I feel like they're too close in color. The flying geese don't pop like they do in this example, so keep that in mind when you're choosing fabric. I thought there was a big enough contrast, but I don't know that there is. But then you'll take your 4 rectangles and you'll place 1 on each side. So we're just going to take this, we're going to sew it into 4 sections. So we'll just take these 2 pieces, flip them together, and we'll stitch along here. And then we'll repeat with all the rest. Okay, so I've got our piece sewn together here. I'm just going to flip it over, and we're going to press up like this. So let me show you why I like to do that. If we were going to press this direction, we would have all of these seams from the flying geese that would make it really bulky. So if we press towards the solid rectangle, then there's less bulk in our block. So we'll just go and we will just finish sewing and pressing the other 3 blocks. Okay, so we have our pieces, our 4 pieces sewn together. So now we will just assemble this as a 4 patch. So I'm just going to take this piece, flip it, stitch right here. This piece, we'll flip it, and we will stitch along here. Okay, so we have our 2 pieces sewn together. So we're just going to take this one, we'll flip it to this side, this one we will flip to this side. Then we're going to just lift and press, and then this will press the seams in opposite directions. And we do this because we want to nest our seams. So next we'll take this, we'll flip it right sides together, and then you can see that we have the seams going opposite directions, and then these will butt up nicely right next to each other as we sew. So we'll take this to the sewing machine and we will stitch along. So we have our block finished, and I just want to show you on the back side how we press this. So for a 4 patch, if you can press one side of the seam one direction and the other way, then it will lay nice and flat. And that's because you can kind of fiddle with this middle piece and open up those seams just a little bit, and then they'll lay flat. So you'll want one side to press up, the other side to press down, and it's not always super clear which way is which, but if you fiddle with that middle, then it will open up. You can kind of see it makes a little square in there. This one might be a little bit easier to see. Maybe not, but it makes this a little, it opens up into a little square in the middle, and then it will just lay nice and flat, and that bulky center where all these seams meet is not as bulky when you do that. So that is how you make the Louisiana star. Like I said, pay attention to your fabric choices. This one, the colors kind of muddle together and you can't see as clearly this windmill effect. So be careful with that. Like I said, go ahead and check out my printable. I have 5 different sizes in that printable. So check out my shop for that. There is a 6-inch, there's an 8-inch, a 10-inch, a 12-inch like this one, and also a 16-inch size in that printable. So go ahead and grab that.